Hello everyone and welcome back to Seduce Me to the Demon War, and we are back on James's route trying to get the bad ending. So, I found it, so let's continue. The ringing sound of clashing swords greeted me and James as we sprinted into the castle towards the main hall. James placed a hand in front of me as I spotted the battle waging at the foot of the throne dais. Diana and the Demon Lord slammed their swords against each other over and over in violent repetition, with Diana leveled to her tall opponent in flight. Just from the force behind their swings, you would think that their swords would break and bend. The sound of their steel, however, could not cover the snarls that erupted from them as they pressed against the clash between them.
It's over, you brute bastard! We'll see about that!
With a heavy grunt, the Demon Lord pushed his sword forward with a pulse of red energy, causing Diana to fly back and slam into a pillar with a painful thud.
Ah!
Diana crumpled to the ground, her wings instinctively folding in against her back from the impact. However, it only took a second for her to recover and look up with a rejuvenated glare. Oops. I right-clicked. Vaulting off of the ground, Diana flew at the Demon Lord once more and slammed her sword into his, a large burst of purple flames erupting from between their weapons.
I will send you to hell where you belong!
James and I watched in silence as Diana and the Demon Lord danced their deadly duel, not wanting to get in the way of either of their rage. After all, James was merely a backup, and Diana seemed fine so far. For some reason, however, as I stared at Diana, something about her hits looked almost effortless, like something was guiding her sword to land each strike. Was she that skilled in combat? After a flurry of deadlocks, Diana finally managed to swing her sword at an angle, slicing the back of the Demon Lord's hand and making him drop his weapon.
You!
The Demon Lord quickly stepped back and reared his other hand, forming a large red orb in his hand. However, as soon as he thrust it forward, it began to dissolve and dissipate in the air, vanishing completely before it reached Diana's body.
What?
Diana stared in shock at the occurrence, taking in that his attack didn't hit her, before she slowly grew a smirk on her face and a golden glow over her red irises.
Looks like you're all out of energy.
With another growl, the Demon Lord repeated his action, only to stare in disbelief as it evaporated into the air. It was large enough when in his hand, yet it vanished all too quickly. Something was wrong. Diana didn't seem to care as she lifted her hand back behind her and formed a large purple orb in her palm, before shooting it forward. The orb slammed into the Demon Lord's chest and pushed him against a pillar harshly, forming large cracks in the stone at the impact. Sip.
It's over!
With her battle cry, Diana gripped her saber with both hands and flew forward, charging to skewer the Demon Lord through his chest. As she began to fly forward, it gasped at the sight of white feathers slowly painting over Diana's demonic wings. Angels were here. Wait! Diana wasn't listening. Her eyes became completely glossed over in a gold color as a strange white glow began to emanate from her form like a holy light and guided her forward towards her intended victim. With a mere blink, Diana had run her saber through the Demon Lord's chest, piercing through his heart and impaling him against the pillar. James and I could do nothing but stare in shock at what Diana had done and what was happening to the succubus in question. Her body let off an almost ethereal white glow as she snarled into the Demon Lord's face.
May Satan take you and tear you apart in the pits of hell.
My body shuddered in fear at the sound of her voice. While she had a natural, some sort of demonic resonance as she spoke, something else was laced into her voice, giving it almost a celestial lift in tone. Oops, my drink spilled. The Demon Lord's eyes glazed over and soon lost their sight as he ever slowly went limp over the blade embedded within him, blood slowly dripping from his mouth and onto Diana's forearms. Diana, however, released the handle of her blade and glided back, shaking her arms to rid them of the Demon Lord's blood. Despite what I normally expected from Diana, the succubus didn't seem to care that her mortal enemy had fallen at last. She didn't even seem to care that her wings had become angelic and covered in beautiful white feathers. If it wasn't for her demonic taint, skin, and horns, I would imagine Diana at the moment to be confused as the angels I imagine from the human world. The reality of the situation, however, was apparent. Something was wrong with Diana.
It is done. It is over.
I looked to James, seeing him cautious but deadly glare burn itself onto Diana's form as she looked up at him, eyes still glazing over in golden glow.
It isn't truly over, is it?
Diana stared at the pair of us for a moment before lowering herself onto her feet on the floor and letting her new angelic wings fold against her back patiently. With an almost sickening sweet smile, Diana lifted her hands towards James and beckoned to him.
You are correct. You must take your throne, Restra.
My anger flared at the sound of his true name escaping her lips, but my soul began to quiver in fear. Diana was being controlled by angels, and now she seemed to be an instrument for James's destiny. James, however, remained at my side, glaring hard at Diana still, with a hand across my body in protection.
You do not have permission to use my name with such familiarity.
And why do you say that? I am the queen of the demon world now, and you are my betrothed.
Diana ran her hands back through her hair and over her horns, dragging them down her neck and over each curve on her upper body seductively. This was definitely not Diana.
My mind, body, and soul are completely yours, as is the domination of this world. I share these pleasures and power with you, with the purest love from the bottom of my heart, as your true, universally intended bride.
James reached his hand back and took my hand, knowing that her words were digging into my mind with edges of betrayal and annoyance. I knew James wouldn't accept her, but I also knew that this was not the Diana, so who knew what the angel controlling her would do next? Diana tilted her head to the side, slowly lowering herself onto her knees and stretching her arms by her sides, bearing herself to us.
Unless you desire me to be your slave, I will happily give you the throne and eternally serve you until the end of time.
Enough! Release her and reveal yourself, Seraph!
I gripped James's hand, staring wide-eyed at Diana as she simply chuckled and guided her hands together, pressing her palms between her breasts and leaning back to stare at the high marble ceiling.
This child of Lilith is offering herself to you, demon, yet you refuse to take it.
You know my answer.
It is a foolish answer. This demoness can become a vessel of power for you, the mother of your lineage. What more can you desire that the human can hope to provide?
Stop it! Stop it, it's not very nice. This time I had to interject. This was wrong and underhanded. Whatever spell Diana was under gripped her tightly enough to become some sort of twisted submissive to James, and no part of me appreciated it. This angel was some sort of sick and twisted being that needed to be stopped somehow. James finally stepped forward, forming a sword in his hand and staring down at it in serious thought.
An angel like you can never understand the desires I hold.
That is because your desires are misplaced. You know deep in your heart that you desire to rule over this world. Your demonic blood craves the power.
I watched James gaze deep into the steel of his blade, locking eyes with himself. Still, he continued to speak.
It is true that some part of me wishes to rule this world. Some darker, unfeeling shadow of the past that was raised to live and become the ultimate lord of this plane.
As James gripped the handle of his sword tightly, he shifted his gaze to Diana's body.
My heart knows where it belongs. With the human who loves me as I love her.
My heart fluttered in my chest at James's words, feeling every ounce of passion and determination embedded with each sound. Diana, however, let out a dark laugh.
Love. How fleeting. Your defiance comes from such a weak emotion.
As Diana finally straightened back up, I stepped back from the sight of her eyes. Instead of black pupils, her golden eyes held two dark crosses burning within her lost irises. The smirk on her face intensified, almost like a Cheshire cat's sickening grin.
Allow me to show you a power greater than love!
With a hard flap of her wings, Diana jutted forward, forming another saber in her hand and arching it across James. Her target countered in reply, clashing his sword to hers with a heavy clang. I instantly jumped back away from the fight as James and Diana began to clash swords again and again. James' face showed his pure concentration as Diana's cackled in both an insane glee and obsessive desire.
Fight however you like! You cannot escape your destiny!
I will, and you will not stop me!
The speed of their clashes increased. The rapid sounds of steel beating steel crashed through the air like a wave of violent drums. They were equally matched, and neither seemed to be close to giving in. How long would this fight go for? I knew Diana was probably exhausted from the fight, but the angel was working through her, so there was a chance that her exhaustion wouldn't matter. Then again, James had not lifted a finger yet in this war, so he had some energy to spare. The entire situation became full of confusion and concern as James and Diana continued to duel without hesitation or need for air. As James took a heavy swing towards Diana, the succubus leapt back and sank gracefully onto her feet, using her wings to ease her descent and stance while she licked her lips.
Love is a fleeting game. Those who expect it to bring happiness will only experience sorrow in the end.
You're wrong. I was tired of this angel trying to get in between me and James. Enough was enough. I stepped forward, trying desperately to find more energy within me to fight alongside James, but spoke out regardless. You don't know anything about love.
I know more than you ever will, human. I have lived for eons serving heaven, and have watched your kind rant and rave all about love and its existence.
Diana lifted her hand to her chest, grasping at it over where her heart was, and almost laughed at me and my words.
You humans use love for the most meaningless of things. I love him, I love her, I love this, I love that. You claim love to be a powerful emotion, yet you can't even give it the power it supposedly deserves, as you use it for everything. I've watched that word fall on deaf ears. I've seen lives destroyed, despite love guiding them forward. The mere word has become a throwaway amalgam of letters, used to express minor joy for things that will decay and die in the end.
It doesn't matter what you think. I knew deep down that the emotion of love was stronger than this angel could ever imagine. This wasn't something it could debate against when I had experienced it firsthand with the man it was trying to take away. He's got a very ab-tastic belly button. Diana laughed and shook her head, guffawing at my exclamation before stretching her arms out to the side.
Love is weak! I have claimed the body of a succubus who is full of true love, and not even her love can stop me!
I stared wide-eyed at Diana. She was in love? Even more so, she had a pure and true love? But if love was the factor behind control, then something was off. I shook my head and glared once more at Diana, burying my gaze into her eyes and the angel who was controlling her movements. You controlling her has nothing to do with love. You're taking advantage of her being weak from the fight with the Demon Lord. Finally, Diana's face melted into a glare as she bared her teeth at me and growled.
You know nothing! Less than nothing! Filthy, unclean human! You open your mouth and spout nonsense and forget your place in the universe!
It's very angry. Diana's saber began to glow an unfriendly white color as Diana's hand began to quake, holding it. Was Diana fighting back, or was the angel's anger shaking her limbs with rage? I wasn't able to tell.
I will erase you!
A hard flap of Diana's wings made Diana fly forward towards me, sword held high enough to rip me in two. However, her blade was met with James as he rushed up and guarded me.
You!
James pressed back against Diana's saber, his body glowing a dark gold color in response to her ever-growing aura.
Your battle is with me, Angel. I will not let you touch her.
With a heavy snarl, Diana pressed herself against the deadlock, leaning towards James and practically frothing at the mouth.
I will make you yield!
Unaffected by her screams, James summoned a burst of yellow energy forward, knocking Diana back towards the throne dais. Diana flipped back and floated in the air gracefully, shaking her head before sneering at James. The demons sprang at each other once more, slamming their swords together in hopes to push the other away or strike their opponent down. Purple and gold clashed through the room, the speed of their duel growing exponentially with each hit and parry. Watching Diana, however, I could tell that exhaustion was hitting her hard physically. Her hits became wild and thrown by adrenaline instead of with purpose and intent to kill. The angel wouldn't be able to hold on for long. James was putting up a good fight despite this, easily blocking and dodging her attacks before pummeling a barrage of his own, laced with gold energy that burst between their swords at each hit. As soon as an opening became available once again, James gripped onto Diana's wrist and twisted it back, making her release her saber with a painful scream and causing him to drop his own sword.
Enough of this!
Using the momentum of his attack, James spun Diana around so her arm was almost dislocated behind her and slammed his feet into the back of her knees, causing her to buckle forward and land with two painful thuds. James, however, pushed Diana further down and slammed her body onto the ground, trapping her arm against her back with a foot and gripping onto Diana's large wings with both hands. I gasped. He wasn't going to rip them off of her, right? With a concentrated glare in the back of Diana's head, his fist tightened around Diana's feathery wings and suddenly send a wave of gold through them. The fire stopped at Diana's back, only consuming the wings in a golden red flame. Diana's scream echoed through the room, bouncing off of the floor and walls in a frenzy, as she could do nothing but feel the flames engulf her wings. The feathers that painted over them began to burn and dissolve into ash, falling around her. Soon enough, the pain became unbearable enough to force Diana to make her wings vanish back into her skin, where 2 large burn marks signed themselves.
I'm sorry.
Not giving Diana a single ounce of mercy, James dug his foot beneath her body and flipped her over, causing her back to arch in pain from the impact of her burns on the marble. Smoke snaked out of her back as she gasped loudly. As Diana opened her mouth and let out her breath, Diana quickly grasped onto her neck, squeezing tightly and causing the succubus beneath him to choke. James! Hey! Neither demon would hear me as Diana grabbed onto James's wrist and began to claw at them, desperate to make him let go of her. Her eyes began to flicker from gold to their original clear white and red as Diana could do nothing but spasm from lack of air. Yeah, whatever. I wasn't sure if stopping him would stop the angel, if James did let go of Diana. What if the angel took control and attempted to choke him instead? It was a complicated situation, but it had to be done to stop the angel from using Diana, even if he kills her. As James tightened his grip, Diana arched back, a spray of frothy saliva and blood erupting from her mouth towards the far wall. Her body continued to quake and spasm from the lack of air, and her face began to turn blue. Diana's eyes slowly rolled into the back of her head, finally fading from gold to white as she dug her nails into James's wrist, trying one last time to make him release his grip on her. James wouldn't budge. As Diana's body went limp and settled onto the marble, a large white aura of smoke whisked out of her chest and shot itself at the round eye, settling on the steps and slowly growing taller in place. The white smoke finally formed into a familiar, cloaked being who was arched forward with his veiny hands tensed out beside him. Something about the angel, however, seemed different than before, as if he had somehow gained energy from being within Diana.
You filthy cur! You continue to try and defy your destiny when it is useless!
James stood and glared hard at the angel, forming his sword once again in his hand and pointing it towards his new opponent. His body began to glow, and the room began to brighten at his golden aura.
I have no such destiny to remain in this world. My life is bound to the one I love, not to an empty chair gained through blood.
You will have no choice in the matter!
Like 2 bullets, James and the angel rushed at each other and collided with James's sword against the angel's bare hands. I expected James' blade to tear through the angel's flesh, but the steel seemed pressed against the angel's hands like it was grazing stone. The angel gripped James's blade and slowly began to crush it beneath his hand, causing the magic surrounding it to falter and fade. James and I stared wide-eyed as the angel was able to rip the broken piece of the sword off and toss it to the side like it was plastic. Determined still, James shot his energy through his sword and reformed the blade, going once again for another attack, only to be blocked by the angel's forearms. Upon impact, the steel of the blade shattered like glass, falling to the ground.
I am no mere servant of heaven, demon. I am the keeper of destiny, the scribe of fates. You cannot defeat me no matter what spells you conjure.
Upon his final words, the angel pressed his hands back forward and slammed them against James's chest, forcing him to fly back and slam into the far wall. James! I instantly began to rush towards him, but found myself being lifted off of the ground by the back of my neck and pulled away from James towards the angel.
No!
I grabbed at the back of my neck, feeling the angel's hand grip it tightly and keep my body afloat somehow. His hand felt indeed like stone and concrete, grazing against my skin roughly and almost tearing at the flesh as I struggled. Let me go!
I should have forced you to choose from the beginning, demon. This human will not see reason to let you go. But I know that you will see reason in the offer I will graciously give you now.
The angel held my body out, dangling me in the air like a doll as I flailed and clawed at the angel's arms. My nails merely scratched against his stone skin, and I felt my energy slowly deplete even further than it was in my spirit.
Accept your fate, demon, and I will bring her back to the human world unharmed. Refuse, and I will release her to the gates of hell for the devil spawn to ravish.
As I spoke of James's potential refusal, a large wave of heat burst out beneath my feet, causing me to look down and scream at the sight of the ground. Beneath my body was a large open circle with red flames flaring out of it. Between the flames, I could barely make out hundreds of hands reaching up and try to stretch themselves through the hole above them and towards me. Each hand, burned in red, sent waves of remembrance down my body as an image of Malix appeared in my head. Ah! My feet only spurred me to flail harder in the hole I was in. Uncaring for the friction his hand was causing my skin, I could feel blood gather and dribble from the back of my neck, flesh tearing open for my attempt. James stared up at me, quaking from the fear of the situation, where we were far away from where he couldn't reach me, even if he sprinted as I dropped. I was left to James's decision. James' body began to rumble in despair as James dropped to his knees and slammed his hands onto the marble ground. My heart dropped at his words.
I accept my fate.
No. James!
I accept my fate! Now release her!
Obediently, the angel loosened his grip on the neck of my neck as the hole beneath me closed. As my feet touched the ground, the angel fully released me, and I watched as I rushed over to James, sliding onto my knees before him. James, no.
Say your farewell to her, demon. I will grant her that much before I take her back.
I wrapped my arms around him, desperate not to let go. I wouldn't be separated from James. James, however, wrapped an arm around me and buried his head in my shoulder, his tears falling over it.
I said,
"Fuck you, I'm not leaving." James slowly stood with me in his arms, causing me to stand on my own 2 feet as well. He pulled away and looked down at me, tears flowing down his cheeks.
I love you. I will forever love you until the day I die.
James? James gently cupped my head in his hands and kissed me, shaking in grief as he did. I, however, could only stare in disbelief. Was he really gonna let me go? I felt a small draft open behind me, causing the air around me to circulate and rush past my body before feeling one of James's hands lower to my sternum and push me back. With a gasp, I watched as James kept his hand extended out to me while my body became sucked into some portal. White feathers danced around the barrier, and my mind began to flood with memories that slowly evaporated from the further back I went. Tears continued to drip down James's cheeks as my memories began to fray and burn, causing tears to form in my eyes as well. Our marriage, our embrace, our love, it all turned to ash and vanished from my mind. Soon enough, the sight around me became a pure white, and I could remember nothing but my name. Well, Jesus. Okay, so definitely not as bad as Matthew's, but still pretty bad. So thank you all so much for watching. If you want to see anyone else's bad endings, or if there's some ending that I didn't get on someone else's route, and you would like to see that, please tell me in the comments which one it is, and I will be sure to try and get it for you. If you enjoyed, please leave a like. If you have something to say, please leave a comment. And if you would like to see more, please subscribe, and I will see you all later.